On today's episode of Hack Your Hascom, I'm pleased to introduce you to my guest, Jonelle Thomas. Jonelle is currently a global regulatory affairs manager at Microban International, home to the world's leading product protection ingredient brands Microban and Ultrafresh. She has a background in biochemistry and toxicology and is a proud alumnus of Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey. She has been in the regulatory field for 5 years, and during that time has also been a member of the Society for Chemical Hazard Communication, serving on the Professional Development Committee and now on the Alliance Committee as well. Welcome, Jonelle. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you, Tanu?
I'm good. Thank you for being on. I'm so excited that you are here today. And a reminder for our listeners for past episodes, we have an episode with Ann Damasi that you may want to listen to, which I think is a good kind of a bookend for today's episode because we're talking about our careers and Ann is a veteran career person. I invited Jonelle today to get into what it means to be at the start of your career in this field. And so happy to have you on. Let's get right to it. So, Jonelle, how did you get started in HasCom and what drove you to this field?
Whew, That's a loaded question because I think it's going to sound a little true where a lot of professionals talk about how they kind of got voluntold into HasCom. My journey was a little interesting. Still an accident, but
A
definitely
happy accident. Yeah,
a
sure.
lot more intentional than most. So I did start out my career fresh out of college going into research. I have a background in biochemistry with a focus in toxicology. So of course my mindset was I'm gonna play in the lab. I'm gonna have a great time. I'm gonna do research. I'm gonna be a author. I'm going to be published. And those were all of my goals starting out in research. First, actually going pretty much straight into industry. I had originally intended to be a pharmacist, which is why I had a background in biochemistry and focused in toxicology. But while I was studying in college, I got the privilege of becoming a pharmacy technician. And so I got to see firsthand what pharmacists do. And it was pretty mundane, I have to say. I did get to work in both retail and hospital pharmacy, and so just seeing the pharmacist day to day, it just wasn't thrilling enough for me. And so when I did have my one-on-one conversations with my pharmacist and spoke about my career aspirations, a lot of them were like, "Well, with your pharmacy degree, you can do anything. You can go into industry, and that's where all the excitement is. You get to do research, you get to develop new drugs." And I was like, "Hey, I could do that with my biochemistry degree." So that's what I set out to do. And so I went into industry. My first role was working as a lab technician in a lab doing research on catalyst mobile emissions. And so, with that being my first full time job, the thought there was that I was going to continue to do research, grow, but then eventually maybe even become a group leader one day within our research group, taking on that responsibility, leading a team, charting new waters as you discover new technologies. But then I did end up having a one to one with my manager slash mentor, because she was actually my mentor before she was my manager.
Mm.
And when we spoke, one of the things that she mentioned was, "Hey, I see a lot of potential in you. I think that you're going to go far and you're going to go places. But, in the research field, you really would want to consider going back to school and getting your PhD so that you can attain the heights that I know you can reach." And I was like, "No."
More school.
I was like, "No, no more school." And it wasn't even like an aversion to school because I am currently working on my master's degree. It was
Nice.
more so just an aversion to quitting my job
Right.
because that was
Right.
the requirement. At the time to go get your PhD, you'd have to resign, you'd have to go seek your PhD, get your PhD, and then maybe you'll come back maybe there's a position for you and maybe you get to resume your research. A lot of maybes in there.
Sure,
And I
sure.
like to live in the land of certainty. Not that I live there now, thinking about it.
Uh, the real
Oh,
world isn't always certain, sure.
and so I went back to her and expressed, that I wouldn't want to resign. I
Mm,
feel that I was at a great place in my life where I would want to resign to go get my PhD. So, what are other options? What else can I do? Lucky for me, I worked at the largest chemical company in the world. And so there are lots of options. And so she actually suggested that I should look into product management. And I was like, "Oh, that's interesting. What is that field?" I'm a 20-something-year-old fresh out of college. The only thing I've ever known was to be a pharmacist, I have to work in the lab. And that was it. Everything else around how the business works, all of the different functions that supports a business, especially a chemical company, were completely unknown to me. And
mm,
so at the time, she explained that a product manager was someone who kind of was like the CEO of their own little business, which was their product or their product line. And I was like,
mm,
oh, that sounds interesting. I was like, it's not too commercial because I didn't want to get into sales, but I was like, it's just technical enough for that and, interesting enough that I think that I'd be interested in. So she told me, she was like, okay, you should go connect with the product manager, get to know the industry, and see if that's something that would interest you, because then we can work on your development plan in that direction.
mm,
And so at the time, my company that I was at, they had a mentoring website, and their mentoring website would connect you with professionals all across the globe from all the different business units. And so you would log in, fill out your profile. It would match you to someone that the computer system thought would be a good fit from a personality, background, that kind of area. And so once I filled out my profile, I was on the hunt for a product manager. So I typed in product manager. And then someone popped up and they're like a 90% match. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. I was like, oh, we're going to be great. Like, we're going to be friends on top of being mentors. I was like, this should work really, really, really well. So, of course, I was like, can I? And then we set up the first call. And, I get into the call and I'm like, yeah, my manager told me about product management. This is really cool. And then he was like, wait, I am not a product manager.
Oh.
And I was like, oh. I'm so sorry. And then he's like, I'm actually a product steward. And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, and what's the difference? And so at that point, he's like, how about I tell you a little bit about what I do? Because, we do have a very similar background. He said, based on my background, being technically inclined, having my toxicology background, he felt that it would be a field that I would most likely do very well in. I just didn't know what it was. And so he pretty much, great mentor that he is, he explained everything about his field. He explained how he's a jack of all trades, master of none. I think that's a familiar saying in stewardship, right? Work with all the functions, know a little bit about a lie. And I was intrigued. I felt that it was a lot more aligned with my idea of being in a technical field, but then definitely still getting closer to the business. You really have to understand the chemistry in order to understand the regulations, in order to understand how it impacts the environment, the people, your business, right?
Right.
And so I really liked that idea and that concept. And so not only did he tell me about what he did, but he also introduced me at the time to our product safety organization. And so he set me out on this journey where I met with so many people across the organization from different business units, different functions, just to gain a little bit of insight into what they did specifically so that I could see if there were different like pocket holes. So I met with a toxicologist. I met with an STS author. I met with another product steward and just different people in varying roles around the company so that I can gain insights in what their day to day looked like. Do like kind of like little interviews with them as I really felt out whether this was the field that I wanted to go into.
Sure.
After that year, I absolutely did. I was like, "No, I'm so interested." I was like, "This is amazing. I want to do this." And so then came the how, right?
Mhm.
And that's actually how I got directed into the product stewardship, SDS authoring, hazard communication world.
That's amazing to hear. So I think a common theme I'm hearing here is the mentorship. This started with a great mentor, and of course, the support that you got from your company to, I mean, that is amazing to have a platform like that where you found a match, and albeit it wasn't quite what you first expected, but it got you to where you were today. So I think, reaching back, it sounds like the mentorship piece really has been successful and to what you are doing today.
Oh, absolutely. And it still continues to be. It's one of those things where if I can convey one message today to all of the listeners and everyone out there, mentorship can literally make or break what it is that you're trying to achieve in corporate or in a corporate setting. So I cannot say how important, how valuable it has been at every stage of my career, even up until now. I do still have my same mentor, even though I
Oh,
have changed organizations. Absolutely adore him. Very knowledgeable, a lot of expertise there. But I have accumulated different mentors along my journey as well. Because it did start with my manager slash mentor. And I keep calling her that because the way it was set up, she was actually my mentor before she was my manager. I had interviewed for a job that I actually did not get, but she was on the panel. She was like, "I was so blown away by your interview and so impressed with you." Unfortunately, it was one of those roles where there was already a candidate in mind. And and so she was like, "You almost swayed us." But she was
oh, that's
like,
pretty good.
and in her mind, she was just like, "Well, why didn't I know who you were then?" She's like, "I
Mm,
don't understand. Where have you been? You've been working here, you said, for like 3 years, and I've never heard of you. I've never met you, and you're talented." And so she was like, "I want to be your mentor."
nice.
And she mentored me and gave me a lot of advice for, how to break down certain barriers to reach another level of my career. At the time, it was visibility. Corporate America, it's one
Mm.
thing to be great at your job, but if no one knows you're great at your job,
You're in a vacuum, right? Then
exactly. And so it was a lot of conversations about how do you make impact, how do you demonstrate that you make impact? How do you show others that the things that you do, the work that you do is making an impact to the organization? And so she helped me with that. And that actually allowed me to elevate to my first management role, which was actually a chemist team lead at the time. Um, and I have to say, while I wasn't in that role for a very, very long period of time, I grew so much in that role. One, it was obtained because of her mentorship. And then two, with her continuing to act as like a mentor manager, there were a lot of insights into the role that she gave me and a lot of freedom that she allowed me to tailor my role to help me move into the regulatory field. And so I get that question a lot. How did you go from being a chemist to a regulatory affairs professional?
well, that's
Or
great. That's
yeah,
that is an interesting path, and great to hear because again, very important to have a mentor in your life, which is why we have social contacts, networking that we want to do. It starts off with good people along the way in your career. So I'm glad to hear that's something that is actually working out there in the career, world that we all work in. So with that, when you first started, what did you see as some of the biggest challenges that you faced in your first year as the regulatory affairs person?
so my first role in regulatory was a product regulation specialist. Fancy way of saying SDS author.
Understood.
My partner and I had spoken, and we both agreed that it was a great way for me to get into the regulatory field and really start to learn the different regulations, starting with, hazard communication. It's one of the foundations of what we do as regulatory professionals. We ensure that people understand the hazards of the products, and that they're able to safely use these products that are made at the chemical companies. And so in that role, to be honest, one of the hardest parts of that role was, for me at the time, I had changed from supporting one business to another business. And so I kind of did like a double whammy on myself, because when you're in one business, I did catalyst emissions research, right? So I'm familiar with those types of materials, intimately familiar with the formulas and what they are. In the new business, it was dispersions and resins. I've never done polymer chemistry before. I had to learn polymer chemistry.
Wow.
Had to have a good idea of, your products, because it's hard to know what the hazards are associated with your products if you don't understand the chemistry behind your product.
Sure.
And so that was one of the challenging parts. And then, of course, the other challenging part was you go from working in a field where the most exposure you have to hazard communication is looking at the SDS. And by looking, you're looking at Section 8, for for OELs and
Mm.
exposure controls, and do I need to implement anything in the lab? And then, you're also looking at, okay, firefighting measures, make sure I have the right fire fire extinguishers on hand. And so very basic things, but not a lot of insight into what actually drives those phrases. How
Mm.
are those phrases generated? How are they created? Why are they there? And so a lot of time went into going over the GHS, the Globally Harmonized System, learning the regulations. And then, of course, as a SDS author, at least in my business, you're also consulting with the business on applicability and do you need a STS? Yes, you need a SDS. Why do we have these classifications?
Mm.
And so, you're having to learn the regulations. You have to understand so that you can explain it to your colleagues. Hey, this is the rationale behind why this is needed. This is
Mm.
what TSCA means. This is what GHS means. This is what a SNR is and a consent order. You have to understand this information so that you can explain it to your colleagues, because you're the expert now.
Sure.
And so I think that was one of the hardest things, going from, working in a lab, essentially being the colleagues and being our customers, right? To you're expert. Why is this here? Why do I need to do this? And it's like, okay,
Right.
I'm gonna figure it out. But
That's the
again, I lucked out. I went into a phenomenal group. We actually had one of the larger regulatory groups within the company at the time. And so there were 3 other people who did exactly what I was doing, just for different product lines. And
mm.
so it was wonderful to be supported by them. And then we also did have some product stewards. So we could always
Mm.
lean on our product stewards for expertise and explanations and support. And so I did go into a position where I was well supported. And trust me, it makes a world of a difference. I said that at my current organization, I am one third of our global
Wow.
regulatory team.
Wow.
And I have to say, coming in, if it was just myself and like one other person, trying to wrap your head and your mind around all of that, it's a daunting task.
Sure.
So I'm really appreciative for the ability to go into a larger group with other professionals who were able to support my learning. So I was
Mm.
afforded a lot of time and luxury for learning, understanding my products, and then also the regulations that go with them.
Wow. Fantastic. That's interesting to hear that. A great story there. What about any lesson that you learned the hard way in your early career? Can you share something about that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, one of the lessons, and it was kind of one of those recurring topics, when you get into and you're working in regulatory, at least starting out as you're learning the regulations, you feel as though everything is black and white. It's yes or no. It's either a carcinogen or it's not. Right?
Right.
Right. No, wrong. That's the
Wrong.
left right answer.
That's the right
That's the left
answer. Right.
answer. And so that was actually one of the lessons that I had to learn as a regulatory professional. There's a lot of extenuating circumstances. Even within the regulations, sometimes things are not clear. You go into the Purple Book, you look over your GHS classifications, you'll see, yeah, you have explicit cutoffs, but there's always a but, right? So, but, or maybe, and it's a cat 2, unless.
Depends, right?
Yeah. And so, that was one of the topics that me and my first regulatory manager had a lot of conversations about. The ability to have, exude, and find flexibility because the business, nobody likes to hear no. Absolutely nobody at all.
Of
Not
course.
myself, I'm sure not you or, or any
Mm-mm.
of the listeners. And even less so to business. When you're
Sure.
thinking about the amount that people pour into not just finances, but time, energy, passion to new technologies and launching products. And, you're right there at the finish line and you have to clear the regulatory hurdles, right? 'Cause you have to really learn to work with your colleagues and to understand where they're coming from, because sometimes you're thinking, "Oh, this is absolutely going to be, carcinogen." I keep throwing that out there. But then you learn that maybe it has a mode of exposure that prevents it from being so, right? And so it was understanding that there are flexibilities that exist and working with colleagues to really understand the chemistry, really understand how it's going to be used, understand what customers are going to use in and the applications so that you can try your hardest so that everyone can come together to find a solution that'll work best. And so that was a pretty hard lesson to learn because I definitely said no a few times. And my manager was like, well, let's think about this.
That's where it helps to have your network around you to say, well,
Yes.
let's bounce this idea off each other.
Yeah.
Nice, nice. So now that you're, very, let's call you early seasoned professional in along the way, you must have come across some common mistakes that you probably see in new professionals. Are you, could you suggest how these new professionals can avoid some of these common mistakes in their path?
I'm trying to figure out which common mistakes. So we can always go
Mhm.
into technical common mistakes. Those happen all the time.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
and when we start speaking about technical common mistakes, you'll see that a lot of professionals, for instance, they will misclassify the exact. And I hate to say, it, but we're human. Our systems don't do it correctly. I love the systems, but every regulatory professional will tell you that you have to double check it.
Double check your
Um,
work, right?
yes, because the systems are yes and no, black and white. They don't know the exceptions, right? And but then at the same time, a lot of our, especially younger in careers, such as myself, when I first started out, you don't know all of the exceptions. You don't know all of the rules or the differences that the different roundabout classifications that you may be able to apply. But yeah, so new colleagues, they'll come in and they may not understand all of the exceptions that are available to them because they don't necessarily understand the regulations. And a lot of time you go through, you do your research, you do your training, and you feel as though, hey, I have this book, I know what I'm doing, I'm almost an expert in this field, and I can always consult my textbook. But in truth and in fact, what's really important is for you to use your network. Uh, So it's really important for new professionals to use their network, be able to find and have colleagues that they can lean on for second opinions when things are borderline, when things are like, is this absolutely correct? And so that's one of the things that I would I've noticed in like new professionals as far as mistakes go. And then, okay, so for new professionals from a entering the field standpoint, one of the things that I noticed, especially as I recently completed a recruiting cycle, um, is that they, I'm trying to find a good way to phrase it because I don't want to offend anyone
Sure,
who
sure.
interviewed with me. But just thinking about a lot of the colleagues who reached out to me and applied to the role, the thing for some of the colleagues that did get through, they would ask questions, but then they wouldn't follow through or follow up on the answers that they were given. But I don't know, I wouldn't say that this is something that is specific to regulatory, but more so just as like general career advice.
Okay.
If you reach out to a hiring manager, or someone at the company, someone with the role, and they give you insights or advice into the role or the career or the field, um, it's not just doing the action of reaching out that gets you through the door. It's
Mm,
actually following up on what they gave you that will take you all the way.
I see.
So for instance, I had someone interview with us and they asked about what is GHS, right?
Okay.
Right. Or I don't think they asked what is GHS. I think they asked do I have any advice about how they can prepare better for an interview?
Okay.
And GHS came up. And so my thought to them was, hey, if you had a good understanding of what GHS is, that maybe a little bit as to how we apply it, it could take you that much more further. And so when I met with this person again, the thought would have been, you're going to tell me all about GHS, or at least a little bit about it, not all about it, but at least a little bit, because you recognize that that's an important concept and it's important for this role. And when the question came up again, same
No
answer.
answer. Oh no. Oh no.
So it was one of those, oh, it sounds good. I asked you for insights into the role, but then what did you do with those insights? Right.
Right.
So, because people well, I can't speak for everyone. I will help you out. Most
Mhm.
people will give you all the insights and answer all the questions that you need to know, but you have to take it to the next level. And
Sure.
so I actually did that for one of my roles before. My first research role right out of college, I did mobile emissions catalyst research. Atanu, I had never heard of a mobile emissions catalyst. I didn't know what a zeolite was. The word had never came out of my mouth. When the interview came around, I knew exactly what a zeolite was. I knew what its
You
purpose was.
prepared. Exactly. Exactly.
And so I feel, and I got the job.
Mm,
But I think it's important, and I see a lot of newer professionals make that mistake. You're doing things because it looks good, but are you really interested? You know, because if
mm.
you were interested, you would read about it, you'd follow up about it, or at least pretend to be interested.
Yeah. Because somebody is gonna ask you about it, especially
Yeah.
on your job interview, that probably the big clue is read the job description that you're applying for, right? And know what the terms mean, so
Yes, all of that.
makes sense. Yeah, yeah, and it goes back to, yeah, the soft skills. I agree with you that probably the current batch of students coming out of school or just maybe new career people that haven't picked up on that, they need to work on something like that. And the it's a great suggestion you make is read about it. If you're going to interview, you better demonstrate your ability and willingness to not only learn, pick up the topic and go with it. Otherwise, you're not going to be hired, right?
Yeah,
So,
that's the unfortunate truth about it.
and then don't be, upset that you didn't get hired, but there's a reason. And hopefully the feedback was given back to them that, this is why we didn't choose you.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So with that, how about a recent HasCom project or success story that you're most proud of at this point? You have an example of that?
I have lots of projects, but I think the one I'm most proud of is I actually got a yellow belt, a Lean Six Sigma yellow belt for a HasCom project.
Oh,
And I will
interesting.
forever be proud of that because when you think Lean Six Sigma and you think about, the white, yellow, green, black belts,
Mhm.
everyone thinks about, process improvements in manufacturing, right?
Yep.
No one thinks
Straightforward, right?
about regulatory and
Mm,
how you can improve certain processes. And so for my Lean Six Sigma project that led to the award of my yellow belt, I worked on and improved our reclassification process. So
mhm,
thinking about products and how we initially do the classifications for products. You'll have new information that comes up, maybe new toxicological information mostly, or just new risk assessment information. And the classifications may be updated based on findings in the US or Europe or elsewhere. And so I worked when you think about who's impacted by that change, it's a lot of people all the way down to our customer. And so people we work with, the people who manufacture the product are impacted by these classification changes. If you think that new data comes out to show that it's more corrosive than originally thought, or new data comes out to show that it's carcinogen, you may need to make adjustments at your plant or manufacturing level to account for those. Additionally, your customers, your downstream users may be impacted by these changes. And so, one of the things that I had noticed when we were doing our reclassifications and our GHS classification changes at one my previous company was that our notification process and employee engagement around these reclassifications wasn't working well. And
mhm,
so I had undertook that as a project because we wanted to ensure that we were going to be compliant each and every single time we did a reclassification. And by compliant, I mean being able to get to the point that we're updating our SDS and our labels within our legally allocated time according to OSHA. And so in that project, it was a lot of cross-functional meetings, getting all of our colleagues together in a room, understanding who needs to understand what and who needs to make decisions at a specific point in time so that we can get to the end goal of updating our SDS, updating our label with all of our stakeholders right down to our customers being informed. And so it was quite a process.
mhm. Can
We had to
imagine.
untangle quite a few webs. We had to engage with some colleagues who apparently had never been engaged with before. And so we really just recreated and streamlined that process. And so the improvements actually over time led to our classifications. I think there was one classification or two that went through after that time. It followed the process and went very smoothly. And so I was able to obtain my yellow belt after
Fantastic. That's quite a achievement. Nice. Congratulations on that one.
that. Thank you.
So what about on the flip side? Have you experienced a near miss or setback where you learned something important?
Near miss or setback.
And of course, being a worldwide person, I'm sure, getting your hands on worldwide regulations, that's challenging in and of itself. So perhaps there's something just, not we're not always in the US OSHA world of things. How about anything, a challenge in that sense that you can think of?
Thank you. I feel
Sure.
I always struggle with this question, right?
But it's probably the one thing you've learned most from, right? Because we learn, of course, it's great to have a win, but and be proud of that. It's the other part, the loss or the potential near miss of the loss, that I think that's where people say you learn the most from. Think of a time of that you've run into something. Maybe like you mentioned with the product stewardship or the people that don't want to accept no as an answer. How do you get to that point? Or did you ever find it challenging that somebody in along the downstream use along your organization, did they ever run into you and say, "Look, you need to make this happen. I don't care how bad the classification is. We need to sell it, right? We need to get it out the door, and what kind of challenge, or has there been a way? How do you overcome that sort of thing? Or do you just roll with it, right? Do you roll with that person? Do you feel pressure? Is there a setback from that? Or something of that nature, or worldwide non-compliance? Did you ever run into something there, or get in trouble for a non-compliant issue? And how did you? I
It's
bet you have some of them as a example.
I'm telling you, it's always tricky with
Right.
those, right?
Right. Generalize it then. If there's something you think, it doesn't have to be a specific thing, or talk hypothetically, in your line of work, what would you, let's say somebody new came up to you and said, I'm afraid of doing this. I'm afraid of, what happens if I'm responsible for compliance? Okay, that could be a potential setback, right? And what would your advice be to that person?
Mhm. Okay. Okay, we're gonna talk in hypotheticals, right?
Please, absolutely. You can do that. Not a problem.
So if I was to ever come into and I will say it before. There have been quite a few instances where a customer reports that, they don't believe information that they have is correct, right? And, as a regulatory professional, when a customer comes and, it goes through quality usually, but then it'll come to regulatory to review the documentation, whether it's a label or an SDS, to evaluate for correctness. And then sometimes upon that evaluation, you realize that it's actually not correct. And so it's like, oh my God, what do you do? Do you go back to the customer? Do you just, tell the customer? Do you apologize? How do you work it? And the first thing I'll tell you from experience is you don't go back to your customer. You do not talk to your customer because there are much better, well-spoken people in the room who will talk to the customer.
Right.
Um,
Soften the blow, right?
Yes, yes. The first thing you want to do in almost every one of these situations is you want to engage your commercial colleagues. So the person who would be responsible for that customer or the group of people who would be responsible for that customer. And then you also want to engage legal as well. Um, everyone knows that people are human, but the first thing and the most important thing is that we want to make sure that our customers and our colleagues in manufacturing plants are safe. And so as a regulatory professional, you have duty to make the correction and inform people accordingly. I will say that while it is your duty to make the correction, inform people accordingly, you do still have to watch out and account for the liability of your organization. Because as much as, your first responsibility is to everyone else, there's still a way to communicate it. There's a way to put it out there. There's a way to talk to the customer, to engage with the customer. And you may not be the best person or the right person to engage with that customer. And so, when it comes to like me and my near misses, it's usually things
Mm,
along those kind of lines. Us-
sure.
and, your first instinct is to run and apologize to the customer and say, "Oh, I apologize. I'm making this correction." But that may not be the best way to approach that situation. And
Okay.
so I've learned that you really do have to engage your colleagues. And as scary as it may be to go to your colleagues and own to, making a mistake that
Mhm.
may have jeopardized the health and safety of other people. It's important that you do that you do
Right.
own up to the mistake, that you do correct it, and that you also put it through the correct avenues so that it can reach all impacted the customers or manufacturing plants or colleagues so that everyone can move forward safely.
Right.
So
Yeah, no, that's the right thing to do is what you're saying, right? That is, and own up to what you did and make sure everyone's aware of it. That's excellent point. So good. That's great. And as far as strategies that you've had to use to make hazard communication engaging, anything you could suggest for newer and seasoned employees? What have you used to engage folks in that?
when it comes to hazard communication, I feel that a lot of people respond well to relatability. And so it's all fine and dandy to go through your hazard communication training and say, oh, this is the classification for this, and this is the classification for that. But then a lot of times it might go over the colleagues' heads, right? And so it's always helpful when you're able to give real life examples. And so, like, one of the ones that I use frequently is when we encounter a lot of our solids, they'll get a combustible dust classification in the US, right? And so colleagues start freaking out and they're like, oh my God, how am I supposed to communicate this to the customer? What do I say to them? Like, they're not going to buy this if it has a combustible dust classification. I'm like, wait, like, relax. Did you know that sugar is a combustible dust? Like literally, like table sugar.
That's right. And I think that gets sold a lot all over the
Right.
country. Right.
Yeah, what not too many hazards. You see it in the grocery stores. People buy it, people use it. And so it's establishing that relatability, and it can get a little bit harder with like other chemicals. But then when you start thinking about like your portfolios, it's important to know your portfolios because then you can start making correlations to your own colleagues. Like, hey, do you remember this product line? Do you remember that you sold this into this field? And then you start associating and relating things. And then people become more engaged when they see the applicability to themselves, something they've done, or something they've used. And so I typically try to just make things a lot more relatable so that people can grasp the hazard communication concepts a little bit.
Nice. Excellent. And how about balancing meeting compliance requirements? Obviously, we do that all the time. That's our whole reason for being regulatory compliance. But you got to balance that with creating a meaningful safety culture, right? You want your folks to understand what it is, taking that rule or regulation and actually applying it to an overall culture to keep everyone safe. Any suggestions there?
Suggestions there as a hazard communication professional, you need to
Yeah.
work with your EHS professional. You guys are partners, you are best friends, and sometimes you're one and of the same. I will say that. I have met quite
You're
a
wearing the hat, right?
Yes, I've met quite a few colleagues where they kind of operate in dual roles, both hazard communication and as your EHS. I think it's just important to align those two functions because one of the things that a lot of people actually don't understand and miss is that your EHS professional, your industrial hygienist, the people at the manufacturing plant, they are well versed on protection of people and the environment. Your hazard communication professional, they're going to be well versed on the product. And then putting those two together is what gives you that holistic approach where you have someone who understands the product and they're working with someone who understands the people safety part of it. And then that allows for you to have a really good comprehensive. And if you don't have the luxury of having both of those professionals available within your organization, definitely work towards having someone obtain and have the knowledge around both of those. So you would want someone who has that hazard communication knowledge, understands GHS and the SDS and how to assess the intrinsic hazards of your products and the materials that you might work with. And then you want to attain that knowledge of how does this apply in the environment? How does this affect people? How do we protect ourselves, whether it's through PPE, engineering controls, from the hazards that are associated with these materials? Because everything has a hazard, even water in a certain dose, right?
Sugar as well, table sugar, right?
Yes.
Excellent. Great points. So, how about any particular apps or digital tools now that we're, into our modern technical world? Anything that you've come across that makes HasCom easier or more effective at your work?
I have to say, as far as digital tools go, one of the things that I'm really enjoying from a HasCom perspective is social media. Now,
Mhm.
understanding, can't
Interesting.
believe everything you see on social media. However, the platform, especially platforms like LinkedIn, are really giving HasCom professionals area where they can put out updates, regulatory changes, things that are happening across the world, and it reach a large amount of people in a very short amount of time. They don't typically require that you have to have a paid subscription
Mm,
because, not everyone's organization can afford to have all of these different paid subscriptions to give you global news around the world. And a
sure.
lot of the HasCom professionals will actually cite their sources, put out presentations or link where they got this information from. And I think that the incorporation of social media into hazard communication has really been helping to get that information out there, helps to alert other hazard communication professionals to when there's information available that will benefit themselves and their organization or impact themselves or their organization.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, and again, going back to the networking you're building and just bouncing ideas off of, I've done that myself too, like ask a question or answer a question out there. Hey, did you ever run across XYZ? I find that I agree with having the use of a LinkedIn type network. Everyone's professional, they can weigh in. There's no wrong answer per se, but at least you can hear all the perspectives. So
Yeah.
yeah, I would agree. That's one probably better use of social media than you hear mostly on the news, so that's good. What about any professional networks that you could talk about? Any in the HasCom space? What advice would you offer to others seeking that kind of a professional network to maybe improve on their skills? All the things we've talked about earlier. Could you suggest some of those?
Yeah, of course. I mean, Society for Chemical Hazard Communication, you have to join that. That is
In
like
this field?
an absolute as a HasCom professional. When you think, and I try to look back and imagine that my role now was my first role into HasCom, right? Similar to one of my colleagues. There's only a few of us. How do you meet other professionals? How do you gain other perspectives, other insights? How do you build and grow your network? I had this exact conversation with one of my team members, and I said, if you want to grow your network and, get perspectives and speak to other hazard communication professionals about their career, their growth, their pathways, what to focus on, you need to join a society, whether it's a society like the Society for Chemical Hazard Communication, the Product Stewardship Society. There's different organizations that focus on hazard communication and pulls all of us together. But I think the best thing about those organizations is that not only do they pull all of us professionals together, but they also offer courses where we have professionals with a wealth of experience imparting some of their experience to other colleagues, right? And they have different events where you're able to get together with same professionals with a wealth of experience, 20, 30 years in the hazard communication field. And then they come together and again, they're able to impart their knowledge, their experience, and how they've navigated some treacherous HAZCOM waters for to colleagues as well. But I would absolutely say that as a hazard communication professional, especially at smaller organizations where your regulatory team may only be a handful of people, it's absolutely a requirement. It's not really a requirement, but it's would be very, very beneficial to join one of these professional groups so that you
Great
can
advice.
engage with other like-minded colleagues.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, I have to say, as a member myself of the organization, I've learned so much, and and I do the same. I impart my knowledge where I can, and I think that's what we should all do to make the profession as a whole better. So agree. I agree with that. What about skills, training, or certifications do you think that should be looked at or be thought of as valuable for your personal growth? What has been the best of those that you have had so far?
So as far as skills and certifications, I haven't actually attained any professional hazard communication certifications yet, but I've been looking at a few because there are a few that are very interesting to me. So I know AIHA, they have a SDS authoring certification. You do need to have some experience. I feel that that would be a great certification that will attest to your capabilities as an SDS author as you
Mhm.
seek to demonstrate to the rest of the world and to other hazard communication professionals that you know how to write a SDS. And so that's one that I've actually been looking at. Another certification that I've been looking to, and I think that would be really valuable for those who are looking to go beyond SDS authoring, but it's definitely the certified product stewardship certification that they have. Ooh, who administers that one? I think it's
Is it PSS, Product Stewardship Society, or AIH, not, or
no.
IH?
I think it's ASCP, something like that.
Okay.
I have to make sure
Okay.
to look that up. I'm so sorry,
Sure.
Natalia. But the for the product stewardship certification, that one's
Mhm.
another one where you get to, 1, study, and so they do allow you and provide, like, a study guide and, things to look up, but I feel like it helps you really bring everything together from a US perspective, of course, but definitely understanding the product stewardship principles. So when you think about, hazard communication, then stewardship, the two really go hand in hand. As a product steward, you're simply just expanding who you're talking to about the hazards of this product, and then also engaging with those same people around mitigation measures, best way to use it, the risk profile, how can we use this safely to mitigate those same hazards? And so I feel that when you get that certification, you really start honing in on the what else? How do I do more with my hazard communication skills? And so that's why I would recommend that. And then, of course, becoming a certified industrial hygienist. Yeah, that would be
Mhm.
great. If you can become a certified industrial hygienist and know how to write a SDS, you will really know how to write a SDS.
And I'm sure with your background in toxicology, that's a big one to have too, right? As
Yes, yes.
toxicologist, yeah. Yeah. Great, great. No, I think all those it's an all-encompassing, science to the art of hazard communication. So I think the more you have, the better. It's such a niche thing that we do. It starts with that SCHC group and learning from others. And I think that paired with some great skills and certifications will get you far in the career. So that's a great, great suggestion right there. And then looking ahead here, what do you feel are trends that you see shaping the future of our field in hazard communication?
No, the trends for hazard communication, there's definitely a really big push to move people towards automation. And
Yeah.
I'm not gonna call it AI, even
Mhm.
though we know
The
AI is
buzzword.
included in that, but we are
Right.
gonna call it automation in and of itself. Even the art of SDS authoring. So while
Mhm.
I did come in on the favorable half where there was already automation integrated into the process, from my understanding, before colleagues had to literally come up with these phrases based on the hazards, write these phrases out on the SDSs and literally author an SDS. And so when you think about technological advancements, we're really starting to move towards automation of SDS authoring, automation of label authoring, automation of being able to assess for regulatory changes and impacts when new regulations come out. And we're still not touching on AI yet.
Right, right.
So I think like within our field, considering the vast amount of changes that are happening in the world and the limited amount of regulatory professionals that exist within this niche field, we're really having to lean on this concept of working smarter, not harder. I
Sure.
think that that's one of the biggest trends that you see. Colleagues are out here trying to figure out, hey, we only have two or three people. How can we work smarter? We have to cover the whole entire globe. So we have to figure out ways to work smarter so that you can ensure compliance across all of the regions where you sell.
Nice. Excellent. So with that, we've had a great discussion today, Jonelle. I want you to end off today with some final parting words. What do you think our audience should take away from today's episode?
From today's episode, I think that, we spoke a lot about new professionals coming into the field, how to navigate mistakes made. That was a touchy conversation. And definitely new advice. I want people, especially professionals who are looking to come into this, to really take away that this is a really, really impactful field. It may look boring from the outside, but it is dynamic and it is exciting. Every day there are new challenges and new things that are happening all around the world. And every day is a new day. I say that regularly because I have been working for about 5 years. No 2 days are the same. And and I love that, and I appreciate that, and if that's something that interests you, you should definitely look into coming into our hazard communication world, our regulatory world, getting engaged. Go and join one or two or all of these organizations. Meet some professionals, find a mentor, figure out what you need and what it takes to get into one of these fields. It can absolutely be done. People have entered our field before with no regulatory experience. In fact, most of us have. And
That's right.
so I am confident that we will continue to look for people who don't have the necessary, like actual regulatory experience, but definitely have a passion and a commitment to wanting to make the world a better place and love having a new challenge every single day because I promise you will. Yes.
Great advice. Great advice. Well, Janelle, thanks again for being on today's episode. And for our listeners out there, please be sure to visit hackyourhascom.com. You'll be able to read Jonelle's bio as well as review, of course, today's episode and certainly catch up on those other episodes you may have missed. Thanks again for your time, Janelle, today. It was a pleasure having you on.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tana.
You're welcome.